Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to rise tonight on a very important issue. In November of last year, a 12-year-old child committed suicide in British Columbia after being the victim of online sexual extortion. And the Liberal government has known that this has been a growing problem during the entirety of its nearly 9-year mandate and has taken virtually no action, actually no action, to address this issue. It's gotten worse and more children have been victimized. It isn't just children that are the victims of extortion, and it doesn't just happen online, but I want to specifically address the extortion of children in Canada, particularly over sexual extortion. So this is a federal problem. The criminal code that allows, the gaps in the criminal code that allow these criminals to operate is a federal jurisdiction. The RCMP, which is responsible for catching these organized criminals, is federal. And the Prime Minister passed Federal Bill C-5, which eliminated mandatory jail time for committing extortion with a firearm. And on top of this, he brought in place very detrimental, very poor bail reform in Bill C-75, which makes it easier for offenders to get back on our streets. So instead of reacting in a way that would address these gaps, what the federal government has done is propose a very large bureaucracy that's extrajudicial, that has no costing associated with it, that doesn't have a set timeline for coming into force, and would be subject to regulations that wouldn't be built for years down the road, as opposed to supporting common sense measures like establishing mandatory sentences and increased mandatory sentences for criminals convicted of extortion, bringing in 5-year prison sentences for any criminal convicted of extortion who is acting on behalf of gangs. There could be modifiers for cases of children. And also restoring mandatory 4-year prison sentences for the offense of extortion with a firearm, make arson an aggravating factor for the charge of extortion, and reversing the damage done by Bill C-75. But there's other things that the government could be doing as well, too. We know that the problem of bringing people to justice of any crime in Canada, but certainly serious criminal issues, has been a problem since the government took office because the government has not been appointing judges across the country. There's a lack of judges. And that, coupled with the Jordan principle, has that the lack of the ability of the government to appoint judges has created this system that essentially these criminals act without any sort of deterrent. So I'm just wondering why the government has chosen this kick the can further down the road approach to dealing with child online sexual extortion, as opposed to closing loopholes in the criminal code and ensuring that there is adequate resources and tools for law enforcement and the judiciary to bring criminals to justice.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Technology.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thanks to the Honourable Member for the question here. The member certainly could consider supporting the government's online harms bill, which I think is a major piece of legislation that certainly will help to protect minors and children when they're interacting online. I appreciate this opportunity to speak on the ongoing threat of extortion in Canada. Madam Speaker, the Government of Canada is deeply concerned about Canadians who are victimized by acts of extortion and related violence. The Government of Canada is aware of growing concerns related to extortion across the country, and indeed our government has heard directly from the mayors of Surrey, British Columbia, Edmonton, Alberta, and Brampton, Ontario, about how this is impacting their communities. The recent increase in the number and severity of extortion attempts, particularly targeting members of Canada's South Asian community, are alarming. The Government of Canada and the RCMP encourage anyone experiencing or witnessing extortion to report it to their local police of jurisdiction and discourage anyone from complying with demands for money. Rest assured, Madam Speaker, that the Government of Canada is committed to protecting the safety of Canadians and Canadian interests against these threats. And we are taking concrete action to protect all affected communities across Canada. As Canada's national police force, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police is mandated to prevent, detect, and investigate serious organized crime in order to protect Canadians and Canadian interests. In doing so, the RCMP works closely with domestic and international law enforcement partners to share information and target shared threats. The RCMP and its law enforcement partners across the country have observed an increase in the number of extortion crimes taking place and are working collaboratively to investigate these incidents. While the RCMP cannot comment on specific investigations, of course, I can confirm that significant coordination is underway across the country to address similar types of extortion attempts directed at the South Asian communities in British Columbia, Alberta, and Ontario. While many investigations remain ongoing, a number of arrests have been made, and information sharing across agencies, I would say, is imperative as coordinated efforts are underway to identify that cases that may be related to one another. To this end, the RCMP is actively sharing information with local law enforcement to support their ongoing efforts. Rest assured, Madam Speaker, law enforcement agencies across the country are utilizing the required tools and resources to combat these serious incidents in order to keep Canadians safe. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
The bill that my colleague opposite mentioned with regard to child online sexual exploitation and extortion suggests that social media operators, what it requires is social media operators submit plans to a yet-to-be-created bureaucracy about how they will protect children. Why wouldn't, at a minimum, the government require these plans to be posted for everyone to see or for law enforcement to inspect? Why not have maximum transparency on it, and why not do it now? And also, why not close loopholes in the criminal code and strengthen the criminal code to prevent this from happening right now? Why bureaucracy and tell people to go to a complaints department instead of the police?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And as I've said, the Government of Canada is committed to taking a collaborative approach to address the ongoing threat of extortion in Canada. Nationwide collaboration is underway to address similar types of extortion attempts directed at South Asian communities and others across the country. Investigators have access to the resources, tools, and supports necessary to advance these investigations and hold those responsible accountable. And we know that the Conservatives have voted against $80 million in support of the work of the RCMP, which is truly tragic when you consider what the members are asking for, which is a greater enforcement of the law. Clearly, the RCMP now have the resources as a result of our government's work, and the collaborative efforts that they're making is having a positive impact. Thank you.